Welcome to the Brain Development Podcast. We're here to show parents there is a pathway to healing behavioural and learning symptoms of their autistic, ADHD, OCD, Asperger's, dyslexic, dyspraxic, and dysgraphic child. My purpose is to help empower parents to understand how they can build their child's brain from the bottom up to invoke change. And today I have Jen with me. Jen is Will's mum, but she has a business called Don't Get Lippy, which raises awareness and gives insight into the cleft lip and palate condition. She's also a fitness instructor. I invited Jen on as we were put in touch through a mutual friend and when she needed help with Will. Jen, it's great to have you, and I'd love you to outline to our listeners what you were facing at the time and what the journey has been like since we met.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, and I am so pleased that you're doing this, and I champion you to anybody that I can, because the way that you helped me, 2.5 years ago now, I think, was life-changing at that point, and I think I told you repeatedly at that point, and I still do every time I get the opportunity, even now. But to give some context to myself and Will, because our journey was quite unique to start with. So I am cleft-affected, so I was born with a cleft lip and palate myself, and unexpectedly in pregnancy, Will was also diagnosed with the same condition. I had a very roller coaster like pregnancy, high stress, lots of different things going on, and then he was born, and again, to give a bit more background, he was tube fed for 6 months. He's had a couple of surgeries within his first year of life, poor weight gain, he was on high calorie milk, and then after that first year things got a little bit better, and he was, progressing as I was hoping that he would, and like you would expect, and like all the things that you read on the textbooks. And then I just noticed that his ability and kind of willingness to speak wasn't there. And we kind of went down various routes. Was it because of his cleft? Was it, that he's just a very shy child? All of these kind of things that you kind of hope that it might be related to. And then when he was at nursery, they kind of spoke to me about the idea of referring him for an autism assessment, because he had those tick box kind of things they look for. So, a child that didn't want eye contact, or wasn't necessarily keen to play with his peers, the lack of communication, like verbal communication. And whilst we saw more of the expected interactions at home, it was obviously in that kind of social setting that they were picking up on these indicators. So we had a very quick turnaround. Did we have a quick turnaround? We might have, I can't remember exact timelines now, but we were seen by a paediatrician at a local hospital, and dare I say that diagnosis was very much, we might as well have walked in, we might as well have had a 2-minute chat and walked back out with a diagnosis. It was on the spot decision, and I think because Will was experiencing those kind of tick box symptoms, shall we say, that they look for. And I always believed that there was more to go on and to look into, and really, I wanted to tap into who he actually is rather than his restrictions that he's currently experiencing. And with Don't Get Lippy, so that's an awareness Instagram page predominantly, and I do have a podcast where I've spoken about our journey, cleft related, and I was talking about, maybe going dairy free, because I'd heard these little snippets of does dairy cause inflammation? Does it not? Is it worthwhile? And as you said in the introduction, a mutual friend of ours, Emily, who I still owe a coffee for our introduction. So Emily, if you ever listen to this, that coffee still is waiting to happen. I think she'd met you, and she just said, look, I really think Lara might be somebody that you'd want to talk to. And at this point, I was keen to talk to anybody, read anything, do anything to try and help bring Will out of his shell, for want of a better word. And thankfully you and I connected, and I don't think I could ever pay you for the amount of time and hours and hope that you gave me at that time, which is all I needed. I needed somebody to say, no, just hang on a minute, there is so much to look into, have you thought of? And then our relationship started from there, which I'm very, very grateful for.
Yeah, it's good. It's so good. And how's Will now? Tell me
He
about
is
him now.
he is absolutely amazing. I mean, I am totally obsessed with him, have been from day dot. But he is definitely tracking behind his peers. But, for a child that seemingly didn't really want any interaction with children, he has a couple of friends. He wants to be around people. He can read, he can write. And again, it's that kind of little bit behind, but I don't care. We're seeing that progress, and that is all we could ever want for.
So when we met, you brought him over, and we had an assessment. So I checked his primitive reflexes. We checked some of his core work, and it was funny because you were at my house, and he kept wanting to go into my living room, and he kept wanting to go through the gate that we had up. It was like a baby gate, but it was for the dog. And he was really, getting eye contact, and he was really trying to take you. He kept saying to the toilet, but it wasn't. It was actually into the living room. And he did it multiple times. And that was, he was really engaging, and he was being cheeky. And in fact, the first time he realized he could get out of that gate was to go to the toilet. But thereafter, he realized, if I got mummy to get me out of this gate again, I could go into the living room and go and play with all of my son's stuff in there. And I was like, this isn't right for a child that's autistic. He's really trying to engage, and actually he was cheeky enough to trick us into that. So there was some doubts in my mind as to whether that diagnosis of autism was correct at the time. And what do you think now?
I mean, it's difficult because, he did have those tick box symptoms of not speaking, not communicating. And so I wasn't surprised when he got that diagnosis, but I still, in the back of my mind, just thought, I just don't know. And then when you said that to me, and I was like, oh my God, somebody else sees it. Somebody else can see this child and this glimmer and this twinkle and tinker, this little tinker in, just, you can see that he's trying to get what he wants, in a really kind of low level, we'll just see how we can do this. And for somebody else to see that, who wasn't in my inner circle, to go, no, he really knows what he's trying to do here. So that was when you said to me, about these little things that you'd seen, I was like, oh my goodness, okay, somebody else does see it. It isn't just me wanting the best for my child and hoping that the diagnosis isn't accurate. It was somebody genuinely saying, I think we should look at other things, instead of this overarching diagnosis.
Yeah. And when you left my house, and I'd given you a plan of doing some primitive reflexes, and what primitive reflexes is they're the automatic movement patterns that babies are born with, and before the age of 12 months, those reflexes should actually integrate. They're the things that help that child move around, use their hand to eye coordination, actually roll over, move their neck, get into that rocking position, move to a cross crawl position, and then effectively stand, get their balance with their ocular and vestibular system, and then move forward and start walking. And that's a real process that those children have to go through. And we did that assessment, and some of his reflexes were still retained. So I knew that there were bricks in the wall, as a saying, that needed to be put in place in order for him to then start moving forward in his own development. So we kind of took him back to that stage and did those exercises to integrate some of those reflexes. How did you get on with that initially? Because sometimes it can be pretty overwhelming to kind of think, oh my God, I've got to do these exercises every day. And, the differences, am I going to see these differences?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as the start of that, when you first mentioned primitive reflexes, I was thinking, I don't know what this is. I don't know. Should I know? Is it because I'm a first time mum? Is it because my brain has been so all over the place with, our kind of medical history? And when you first started to explain about primitive reflexes, I was like, oh, I do remember. So, when they're when they're newborns, and the pediatrician or the doctor will drop the babies backwards, for their startle reflex, which obviously I've learned a lot more since knowing you, and their palmar grasp, where you put your finger into their hand, and Will did all those things. So when you said, oh, but there's a lot more behind it, I was like, oh, okay. And again, like with Will's history, he, with his feeding issues and all of that, I was so consumed that I hadn't really kind of thought of the benefits of why you kind of do those, tummy times and things like that. And when you started to explain it, and obviously the importance of those, I did think, oh, okay, I can see where we've like missed pockets of development, and where we can hopefully kind of work our way backwards to start again. And as a fitness instructor, when you were trying to do these core exercises with Will, I was like, come on, your mum's got a good core, you need a good core. But I realised as you were doing them, I was like, no, he has no core at all, no strength there. Which was kind of good for me, because obviously I kind of know that world as well. So I was able to kind of cotton on to what you were saying fairly quickly and be able to implement that at home. But when, you kind of give this plan, and I thought, this is like a full-time job. Where am I going to do all of these moves? But I was so desperate and so overwhelmed. I thought, this is the priority right now. I am going to put everything else to one side. I don't care if he doesn't want to chat with, the child next to him. The importance is to kind of bring him back for him to then springboard forward. So yeah, it was overwhelming, and there were definitely pockets of where I thought, I don't know how much more I can do in a day. But the more you do, the easier it gets, the more natural you can kind of feed those things into your day as well. So it does start to kind of snowball, where you go, oh yeah, I've done that, oh yeah, that counts as one of those. So yeah, it's overwhelming to start, but it pays dividends.
And yeah, there are different sensory things that we can do as well, because lots of these children have sensory issues as well as these reflexes and some of the symptoms, the behavioral and learning symptoms. And so what we could do is we can use sensory input such as vibration, and we use a tool called the ResiMax. And you could also use red or blue glasses. And there's also smell in terms of either lavender or rosemary. So you use those sensory inputs in order to help him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, one of the key things was, you know, as I kind of acknowledged at the start, Will was tube fed for 6 months. So he had no kind of willingness or desire to kind of, well, whether he even had a rooting reflex to start, I'm not sure, in which kind of way round that goes. But he was never bottle fed. He couldn't breastfeed naturally. So when you had suggested using the ResiMax to start stimulating, around his cheeks and around his lips, because, he was hesitant about, that kind of sensation around his mouth. But yeah. I remember, videoing it and sending you a video, and, you could see that his sort of cheek was starting to respond. And I thought, okay, so now we need to work on this more. And I would do these little sensory inputs with the ResiMax whilst he was watching TV. I would do his palmar reflex while he's watching TV, doing these crisscrosses and up and over the fingers. And he was distracted because, to start with, he didn't necessarily like it either. So it's kind of a bit of a way to get around it. And then things like the smells, kind of do it an opportunity. And he loves wearing his red glasses. He likes to go and look in the mirror and check himself out as well. So all these little things that you don't necessarily think of but you can implement. I think that's where the hope comes, because you go, try this, try that, have you done this? And it's all encompassing, and it's a lot to do, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and when you do actually stimulate those reflexes with any kind of sensory input, they then start to integrate faster. And that sensory input is something that the child has before the age of 12 months when they're really young. They're taking in the light, they're taking in the sound, they're taking in the movement, and they're utilizing that sound and also your touch as well. They're taking in all of that proprioceptive input. And that, as well as the movement, then helps to integrate those reflexes. And doing those exercises and using glasses if you can get them on them, as well as using different smells, because that's obviously another sensory input, as well as sound. You can use sound in one of their ears to activate that weaker side of the brain too. And certain different musics as well, so left brain, right brain music that you can use. And I think utilizing that vibration of that ResiMax, really, it's such an incredible piece of kit that it does really help stimulate how those reflexes, or just the body, in order to help integrate those reflexes. And I remember you sending me some little videos, because I'm on WhatsApp, and a lot of the people that I work with are on WhatsApp with me, so they're constantly texting and actually sending me different messages. And it's great to see the progress and to get the feedback from school when school do see that things are moving forward and things are changing. And all those little videos you sent of me to me with the ATNR reflex on all fours and turning his head, am I doing it right? Is this okay? And the more you do it, the more you feel it, and you can see what's actually happening. And even just getting it to those slight movements, you really start to learn from doing it over and over. And it is just the consistency and persistency of doing those reflex exercises with the sensory input, which really helps move things forward and actually create the developmental trajectory the way it should have actually happened. And there are so many things that can hold many children back. But I do, I do know that you also went on to get his eyes checked, and also his auditory system as well, which is obviously sitting within that sensory system too. So talk me through, has that actually done anything and helped as well?
Yeah, so, and again, I guess there is an acknowledgement towards being born cleft-affected, which, for those of your listeners who don't know, a cleft is basically a gap or a split in the predominantly the top lip. It can affect your palate, so the roof of your mouth, but it also then feeds into the inner ear and your hearing systems, and it's there's so many things that can be affected, but also like say your auditory system is another sensory input system. So you may see children with their headphones on, or holding their hands over their ears because they want to avoid that any kind of input. And I guess to some extent Will is still a bit like that, but he's very much he knows what he likes and he likes what he knows. But he's getting better with that, and I think some of that is down to the assessment that you put me forward for with Dr. Raki, and he has these particular soundtracks that he listens to, and to be honest, I do that when he's asleep. He goes off to sleep, and thankfully he's always been a good sleeper, which again I think commonly you associate poor sleep with autism, and thankfully he's always been an amazing sleeper. So as soon as he falls asleep, I pop his headphones on. It's a 10-minute recording. It takes no time or effort from me, and I automatically, almost immediately, was seeing these kind of results of just more calm and more focused. And again, it's still time out of the day that you've got to remember to do it, but again, it's something that is so worthwhile doing.
Yeah, and those frequency sounds are helping fill in some of those gaps that he potentially has missed in terms of not being able to hear at a certain frequency. And that really helped my son in terms of the development of his prefrontal cortex, to help him to integrate some of those reflexes, but also with organizing himself, being more focused, being more present in the room, and actually hearing the teacher at the front, because those frequencies are different depending on where you sit in the room. and being able to hear all frequencies, then you can take in those instructions and you can then process that information in order to take action. And there's many steps in there for a little kid to take on. And, if you're not hearing all frequencies and you're sitting in that classroom, that Johansson program is just life changing. And it really isn't a huge effort. It's just remembering it. And we used to use it as we were going to bed too. So I'm glad to hear that it
It's
has.
almost like, I'm sure people will have heard of Baby Bark. You can kind of play that kind of classical music, and it's meant to either help them go to sleep, or, and it kind of sounds like that, and it's like waves, and it's lovely to listen to anyway, but the fact that there's benefit off the back of it as well and seeing improvement, it's just, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really good. And you've also, when Dr. Kyle Daigle was over, one of those times, you went to see Kyle and you had a QEEG, which is effectively putting on like a little swimming hat with different electrodes in it, and it's hooked up to his laptop. And he can actually see from sitting rather still, and that's obviously difficult sometimes. And I know we did find it hard to actually get a really good reading to see what brain waves were effectively across his left and right side of his brain, and which side had underactive and which had overactive networks, and then effectively setting a plan in order to help move those into a better position and correct them. So tell me a bit about that and how that was really insightful for you.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's thanks to you, because you knew that I would willingly do it, and obviously various circumstances were affecting our ability to be able to see Kyle. And I remember you texted me saying, "I've done it. I've got you like a slot at the end of like a full clinic day," and I was like, "Oh, thank you." So I obviously nipped up to London with Will, and like Kyle's presence anyway is so, like, he's not an intimidating person, but I was so in awe of like how he works, the way he
Yeah.
does things, his knowledge. It was just fascinating to watch. And he did so much more in that really short space of time, those first sort of 15 minutes or so, quick sort of, history assessment, and then working on the primitive reflexes, which you'd done already, and then postural reflexes. And, it was just fascinating to see what he was able to do and able to understand of Will in such a short space of time. Whereas I felt, when he'd received a diagnosis, it was quite dismissive. Whereas, like, yourself and Carl are like, yep, can see this is outstanding, this is still retained, da. And it was just, again, it was like another like boost of hope of like, this child will be able to do all the things. Okay, he's doing it in his own way, and he might be a little bit behind here and here and here, but actually we can push that on. So I absolutely loved it. What I didn't like was trying to hold my child still for the few minutes that they need, and it is a snapshot, isn't it? I think
Yeah, it's
I'd had
literally
to,
like 3 or 4 minutes.
yeah, and I'd had to like try and hold Will still, and I think we'd put on, I don't know, Dougie. Probably not the best program of choice, but it was something that he enjoyed watching. So I was trying to keep him still, whilst they could get an accurate reading. And I think even as we were leaving, Kyle sort of said like, "Oh, I'm not sure like what will come back." And again, I remember you texting me the same night saying they've had the results, they've got enough that they can read and that they can, feed back on. And then I remember you sending me like various bits and pieces to like help me understand, like you say, what was underdeveloped, what was overdeveloped, that kind of left side that we established wasn't working as well as it should be, and so on. So it was absolutely fascinating. So if anybody has the opportunity to do it, I would highly encourage it.
Yeah, I think a QEEG is so important to do, because you can actually see what's going on inside the brain. You can see those alpha, beta, delta waves. You can actually understand which ones are overactive, what side's underactive. Then you can do exercises in order to stimulate that underactive side to bring it up and reduce the overactive side. And didn't you do lab testing as well? So in order to see what was going on inside his brain, you then also did what's going on inside his gut, because there is a real connection between the gut to brain axis via the vagus nerve. And you can use that ResiMax to stimulate the vagus nerve as well. But what did you do in the end in terms of lab testing to understand
Yeah.
what was happening in Will's gut?
And I think, off the back of, both Kyle's appointments and, the things that we did following, I think it's really important to note that everything up until this point has been theoretical. Whereas, like,
Yeah.
when you get results, when you're seeing somebody's brain on a screen and how it's working, that is factual. That is exactly what is going on, and you can work with that. Otherwise, up until this point, it's been like, well, it could be, sort of when Will had received his diagnosis, for example, it was, well, he's got these check boxes, so off you go. Whereas
Well,
this,
it's somebody's opinion.
yeah, exactly. And, and it's a summary of, a snapshot, as opposed to investigating, should we say. And I think in between seeing Kyle and yourself, and then I think we had a paediatrician, maybe a telephone consultation, and you guys had kind of like, said about inflammation and deficiencies and things like that. And I think I'd even asked, could you do any blood work to see if there's any deficiencies? And I think there just had been a misinterpretation, and the doctor had said, oh, you can't test for autism through blood. And I was trying to say, it's not what I'm asking for. But, the long and short of that was, unfortunately, because he had a wide enough food intake, albeit it was restricted at that time, they said he's eating enough of a variety before we would intervene in that sense. So you and Kyle had obviously said about deficiencies and, looking into those sorts of things. So I went and, well, actually it was a virtual consultation with Vicky, who is I just call her the unicorn lady.
She's pretty amazing. I saw her yesterday, and
Oh, amazing.
she works with a lot of my patients. So
Yeah,
she's
and
healthy, happy unicorn,
helping
and
her, there we go, not the
yeah,
unicorn lady, but you'd put me in touch with her, and she was amazing and very positive and encouraging. And so it was a urine sample from memory. It was a urine sample that I had to take. I mean, Will was toilet trained, so it kind of wasn't really an issue to get a sample as such. And then those went back to the lab. She got the results. We had a conversation like you and I are having now. She told me all the things that I should be avoiding, what to include in the diet to help us understand, where his markers were and what would be beneficial. So that in itself was amazing.
So that was an organic acid test, wasn't it? To see whether he was methylating, whether he was actually processing proteins and methylating, and his liver was working optimally. So it's just, I think it's just really important to understand there is so much that you can do, that you can delve into, and accepting just a diagnosis from a set of behaviors, or things that that child's not able to do at that point in time isn't everything. And the stories that I have and the people that I've been working with, you included, and there's a few, quite a few others. There is just so much that you can understand about your child to then really see what a benchmark is. And that inflammation is one of the things that I think is not looked at enough, in terms of, are there certain foods that their little body's not processing appropriately? And are there, is there a certain environment that they're within that is causing that inflammation, perhaps? And so, if you can remove some of those things and calm down the inflammation, that calms down the brain inflammation, then you can really start to, build the brain up by using fish oils and different vitamins. They're always deficient in B and D. And those fish oils are really important because the brain is effectively just fat anyway. So it really needs, lots of fish oil. And you're giving them good fruit and veg, and really reducing those inflammatory foods. And dairy is really inflammatory, as well as wheat, gluten, all of the kind of bread, cakes, biscuits, and actually giving them really wholesome foods, and ensuring that they're getting enough fruit and veg. There are those, allergy testing, food sensitivity testing that you can actually do too, to see whether there is anything that's really triggering their behavior. A lot of the time it is certain foods, because what else do you consume? You consume food. So really working out what is important for that little one at that time. And things change over time. Like, some children don't need to stay gluten and dairy free their whole lives. I have, because it made me feel good, and it's made my husband feel good, and we did the whole house did it. And it made a huge difference to my son. But that doesn't mean to say everybody's exactly the same, and everyone is actually built very, very differently. Every child I see is different, has different primitive reflexes. Is their ocular system tracking? Is their vestibular system online? Are they able to do the things they need to do in order to have a stable foundation to go on and use their fine motor, gross motor, and effectively use their higher level learning capabilities and take in information, process it, and apply it. So I think one of the things that I'm feel very positive about, and this is why I wanted to really do a podcast with you, but also put this out to so many more people, is that there is just so many other things that you can do rather than just accept a diagnosis. And what I want to do is really raise that awareness.
Yeah, and I think, I like I said, I didn't necessarily disagree with that diagnosis in time. Like, it's a hard diagnosis to accept, because if I then went on to do the government understanding about autism course, and unfortunately it's quite sort of, I read it to be quite negative percentage rates, like 90 odd percent of autistic adults were living at home. And this was, again, a couple of years ago, so all of that data will have changed anyway. But I wanted to find other ways to help him. Even when I left the paediatrician appointment, I said, well, what else can I do to help my son? And the response was, just keep being mum. And of course, I'm going to be mum regardless, but I really wanted tangible things I could do with him that were going to benefit him, and see that progress, because you just hope that your child is obviously going to live like a wonderful, fulfilling life, that they can be independent. But at that moment in time, when your child can't speak, doesn't want to be around other people, it's a very foggy and difficult place to be. So to then obviously have those opportunities and go, oh no, like, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? That you may not necessarily think of yourself, or, and even in the, baby books, the pregnancy books, I don't know that I ever read anything about primitive reflexes. And you kind of think, but that's a huge component. It's why we do tummy time, and it's why it's important to have that skin to skin, and obviously all the things that we know, but actually to know the reasons why it would have been so beneficial. So rather than you being my last port of call, I wish you were my first port of call, because it would have made things so much quicker, easier, less stressful. I mean, I remember texting you being like, I don't know what to do with myself. I was such high anxiety, and that's because I only ever wanted the best for Will. But yeah, I wish you'd been a first person to call rather than the last.
And I know that his speech has really come on as well. It came on within the first 6 months that we were working together. So that was something that I loved seeing, all those little videos of him actually singing along. So Jen, I really appreciate the time.
Of
Thank you
course.
so much.
No worries.
And what we'll end up doing is we'll follow your story, and we'll come back to you in time and see how Will's getting on. Thanks.
I'd love that. No worries at all. Thank you, Laura.